Okay, cool. Hi everyone, my name is Christina Lampert. I am the creator of the Sustennial Network, which is a place for celebration, I would say, of the sustainable millennial lifestyle. And as part of that, I love to learn about businesses, and in this case, fashion designers that are using their own business and their own talent as a force for good in their day-to-day. So I have someone here. She is amazing. I met her at the New York Fashion Week show. She was one of the designers. Her name's Topp, and she's here to talk with us a little bit about her journey. We're going to go into the line that she showcased during New York Fashion Week, and she just got a really exciting job at L Brands that we're going to speak to as well. So welcome, Haley.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. So thank you so much for joining. I figured we could kind of start out. I feel like, yes, it's such a generic question, like, okay, like, tell me about your journey. But I think it would be great to learn about why fashion in the first place. And ultimately, I feel like all of us, sustainable, so to say, whatever we want to call it, have had that moment and remember that moment where we're like, okay, this is the way things are being done. This is not okay for the environment. And we kind of need to change. And I feel like I want to be part of that change. And anything like you're willing to share about that.
Right. So I pretty much made clothes since I was like 8 years old, for as long as I can remember. I've always been sewing for sure. My mom was very artistic, so there was always arts and crafts. My dad is super artistic. He's a way better drawer than I am. But so always art going on, and like that was always a priority in our house, was just have art. And then I got good at hand sewing. My grandmother saw something I had made when I was young, and she was like, I had made a purse out of old t-shirts when I was like 8. And she was like, where did you get this idea? And I was like, I don't know. I just saw it like in my head. So she bought me a sewing machine. And I made clothes, not very well though. I was really upset. I didn't understand seam allowances. I didn't get like fit. I didn't understand what even darts were. So I'd be really mad that I'd spent all this time making something and it would never fit. And I was just like, I hate this so much. So I got mad at it, and then I didn't sew anymore. And then I switched to like art and making furniture and different things like that. And then really, I didn't go to college right away. I didn't go to college until I was 23, because I tried and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I said, art had always been something that was going on, but I was convinced I was never going to make money off of it. So what could I do that would satisfy me and my hopes, my dreams, things like that on the inside? And really it came back to fashion. It came back to making clothes, and it came back to just being in the industry. I didn't know what that meant really. I didn't know if I was going to be some great designer. I didn't know if I would just work at a house. I didn't know. There's so many jobs you can have too. Like I didn't even know that I could have the job that I currently have. So, it's cool, and I'm really glad I'm in it. I think that I know for a fact that I actually got focused in sustainable fashion when I listened to a podcast about the beauty industry. It was a business of fashion podcast, and they were talking about how there's only 13 banned chemicals in the United States, but there are over 300 in the EU, and how the two countries view chemicals very differently. That in the EU, chemicals are guilty until proven innocent, where in the United States, it's viewed the exact opposite. And that really got me thinking, mostly because they kept talking about how your skin is your largest organism or organ. So, like if you're putting all that onto your body, it's going to get absorbed. And really, I had gotten a lump in my armpit from deodorant, like aluminum deodorant. And I was so scared I had breast cancer. I was so scared. And so between the podcast and the lump and everything, I was like, no, that's it. We're switching to all naturals. So it started with that. And then it kind of slowly snowballed. And also the fashion part is that like, I never I've never had a lot of money, so I never had the luxury of like going and buying new things always when I wanted. So I've always thrifted and I've always done vintage. And that just kind of kept snowballing like out of control. Then we did a project. Then we did a project my junior year, and it was a zero waste project. It had to be zero waste. You could cut into it because they do no cutting projects too.
Yeah.
You could cut into it, but you had to use 100% of it. And there are many different ways to be considered zero waste. So you can, if you make your own fabric, kind of like knitting, if you utilize all of that, that is no waste. You don't have any extras. I currently, as a designer, use Deadstock fabrics. And so then I also use zero waste patterning. I make sure that everything gets used. I will re-scrap it back into the project, or there are certain ways you can cut things. You can take a rectangle of fabric, and if you cut it down on the bias, you can actually make 2 sleeves out of it, and you've used 100% of the fabric. Wow. So, and it's a very mathematical way to look at it, and that's how I always viewed things, very geometrically, very mathematically. This is Leon. He,
oh, yeah.
he's a kid.
Leon's our other guest.
Yeah. Oh, my hair. Thanks. So that's kind of how that all happened.
And so for anyone that isn't familiar, I don't even know that I am. Can you go into what is Deadstock Fabric? And
sure.
Then, did you mention another one as well?
I said knitting kind of like in a zero waste, but also zero waste patterning.
Okay. Gotcha.
So Deadstock Fabric is fabric that was used for a collection by a company. Could be a big corporation, could be a fashion house. They used it for a collection, they made their production, and now they have this fabric left over. And typically, because of the way the fashion system is set up, they're not going to use it again. So commonly, it gets incinerated or just thrown away. If it gets thrown away, though, I feel like everybody knows this, but maybe they don't. So, I always like to explain anyways. But if it gets thrown away, it goes into the landfill and it starts to create methane gas, and that's what breaks down the ozone layer, because the fibers don't break down naturally, usually because they're not single fiber. They have at least some sort of polyester in it. And even now, things with spandex can't be recycled. So that has to be resold, or something has to be done with it. It can't, there's nothing we can do anything with it right now.
Right. And I think it's also interesting, I'm sure you have the metrics more so, but I remember going to something, and I think she's a sustainable fashion designer in Philly, and she kind of laid out an entire square or line of fabric, and we kind of walked through the exercise of like, okay, if this were to be a shirt, we're actually only using this small portion of it, and then the rest has to be thrown away. Do you have any like specifics on that? I know that was a general weird screw in the air, but if that's the case.
That's kind of where the zero waste patterning comes into it. So, there are ways, there are traditional ways to make garments. And then there are non-traditional ways to make garments, which is like the zero waste patterning, because a lot of times you'll end up with like a seam that comes across, but you're utilizing all of the fabric that way, where you don't have to have that. And that's like, companies don't want waste, truly. They want to get the most bang for their buck. So they have markers who will put multiple shirts on and try to get as little waste as possible. And that's just because they want to make the most money. So they don't want to be wasting a whole lot. But yeah, it's true though, because you wouldn't be able to match up, like it wouldn't fit, and you have to have things on grain, otherwise it'll get skewed, and then people will be upset that their clothes don't fit right. So there are limitations to that, but companies themselves. But yes, then in the end, that stuff usually just gets thrown away, the extras.
Or incinerated.
Yeah. The incineration one is really hard, because when I interned in New York City, I interned for an evening wear designer, and he we moved offices in the middle, and some of the most beautiful like brocades and lace I'd ever seen, they were made for him. So he wasn't going to give them to anybody or sell them. So they were marked for incineration. Oh, it broke my heart. I took it.
Oh my God.
Like I just couldn't have that happen.
And do we know, and I can research this too, I don't mean to put you on the spot, the impacts of incineration? I'm assuming obviously the toxins going into the air, but is that more detrimental than having the fabric sit in the landfill, or is it kind of equivalent?
So right now, kind of the statistic is that every pound of fabric that gets saved from a landfill is the equivalent to 2.03 carbon emissions. And I feel like, I don't know 100%. I can't, that fact I do know, but I don't know what the detriment is of like that smoke that's going out into the world.
Right. Okay. Cool. Well, with that being said, as we kind of talk about zero waste and this design thinking with the end in mind, or so to say, your name from the top, I thought we could maybe walk through and provide some visuals of the line that you showcased at New York Fashion Week. I know I was one of the lucky models who got to wear this amazing outfit that I will switch to right now. And I just learned the story from Haley, and I would love if you wanted to just speak a little bit to it. I think the creativity involved and how you even came up with this style alone is just incredible. And then obviously, like, even any inspiration about the line itself, how it came to be. I'm always fascinated, like, was this your first line that you developed? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, so this collection, most of it, I made a few extra pieces for Fashion Week, but most of it was actually my senior thesis for fashion school, because I did just graduate in May. So the collection was, well, I went into it with, it's going to be zero waste. The whole collection is going to be zero waste. And this same gentleman that I had interned for in New York, he had said to me one time that as soon as he opened up the floor to like more than just model-sized women, he ended up tripling his business. And I always thought, like, that's how it's going to be for me. That's how I'm going to be. I'm like, plus me personally, I am a size 8. So, and I don't see myself reflected in the fashion industry that much. So, and it's hard because I feel like I'm not like a model size, but I'm also not plus size. So I fit in this weird in between. So the collection had men, women. I'd also made a plus size look that unfortunately didn't get to walk in Fashion Week. But I had everybody, and all the pieces were supposed to be interchangeable, because the point was that if you have a garment and it has more than one style, or it has more than one purpose, then it will last longer in somebody's closet. So a lot of the pieces are transformable as well. So the dress that you have on, the underneath is actually a zero waste pattern garment. I used 100% of the fabric, selvage to selvage. And that was kind of a technique I had picked up. That sort of draping anyways was a technique I had picked up in Paris. I went to the Paris American Academy and I learned Madame Gray draping techniques. And then on top is actually leftover hat brims. I worked for a hat maker and she was just going to throw them away. And I had many more. And I was, at first I thought, well, I'll just make these into other hats. Like, that's exactly what I'll do with this. And then I had so many and I was like, I can just make this into a garment is what I can do with this. And I didn't know when it would come about. I didn't know when or how it was going to happen. And I don't think I necessarily even knew it was going to be in this collection. But then as the collection started to evolve, I started to use knitting as a point of reference for zero waste, because usually when you knit things, you don't knit more than you need because it's just going to unravel. So it in and of itself is zero waste. So then to me, these big hat rings looked like big knits. So I was like, that's that's what I'll do. I'll have different scales of knits that are going out. And the girl who's walking out in the back corner, so I actually programmed that. She has a knitted sweater on in the top. I programmed that knit on an industrial knitting machine, and it basically just printed out like the whole garment just like that. So nothing got wasted. And the skirt she has on is also salvage to salvage, and scraps like that were made from other pieces I had quilted back onto there. But that skirt can be worn like that, or you can turn it upside down and the zipper will zip at your waist, and instead it will tie at your ankle. So it also just has like dual wear. Your dress can be like can be unraveled, and the whole thing can just like balloon out, and you can kind of have this like moo thing. I love moo. So
yeah. I think I have Michael's here as well. I have you on.
okay, yeah. So his is like, his pattern is not technically zero waste,
Okay.
but the scraps that are on it is everything that was wasted from other places, and I used it to make the pattern that was on there.
And is that knitting? Is that what we're talking about when we say knitting, or like knitting?
Oh, well, no, that's quilting actually.
Quilting.
But if you look closely, I don't even know if the camera picked it up or not, but I quilted it on in knitted stitches, like in the pattern of knitted stitches. Mm-hmm. There's another skirt in the collection that has that same pattern. And it's actually, the fold is at the waist. So she could flip it over and then have another skirt on the other side, and it's a different pattern. And I also programmed that one.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So just a lot of the, yeah.
Think about it. Amazing. And then this other, please recycle this garment.
Right.
I feel like that was just like that, like to the end of the line.
That was my favorite. And she has on the sleeves, you can't see, she's got the coat inside out, but on the sleeves, I knitted some of the hat rings as well. So there's like an applique on the sleeves. And then, yeah, on the inside, I embroidered, please recycle this garment. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I was saying that, everything I have is like thrifted or vintage or, what have you. And I want it to be, as a designer, I want somebody to find my garments in a thrift store or a vintage shop 50 years from now and still think that they have value. So I want them to transcend time.
Amazing. Cool. Okay, and then I think there's just one more. I don't know if you have anything to speak to with these two, but I thought.
Yeah. So the pants that the gentleman has on in the navy blue, actually both sets of pants are a zero waste pattern. It's like similar to the sleeve. The gray sweaters sleeves are like that too. Like I said, you cut it down on the diagonal and it kind of wraps, and then just all the seams match up perfectly. You kind of adjust for fit. And so then you use selvage to selvage. And it's just like, I didn't have any extras and I didn't leave anything behind with making those pants. And both gentlemen said that they loved them. The one is like a woven trouser and the other one is more like a men's legging. The blue overshirt is knitted. So that was just like 100%. I hand knitted that on my knitting machine. And then actually when I went to, so we had to be critiqued in fashion school on our collection. And everybody said how much they really liked how the collection was able to be worn by anybody. And they looked at the gray sweater with the black pants that I always had envisioned went on a guy, because I wanted to show that, like, strong guys can look good in this. Like, I mean, the clavicle is like so sexy. I don't know. I just think it looks good. But he was like, one of the gentlemen in my critique had said, I think you should put the gray on a girl as a dress. And I think you should have the guy wearing the hat rings over the leggings. And I was like, I had never even thought. So I have worn this look as a dress with high heels before.
Amazing. That's really sustainable when your husband can wear it and you can wear it.
Exactly.
Wow. Oh my gosh. You have to send me a picture of that or something.
Yeah, I definitely will.
That's awesome. So cool. No, I think that it's just such an impressive line. And I'm also curious, for your thesis, I mean, how long did this entire thing take you? Obviously, sounds like a lot of it was done by hand.
Right. Well, everything. I made everything by hand. Nothing went to a factory. My two hands made everything. So basically, it was my whole senior year of college. It started in the fall, and we had to come up with muslins, which is like a mock-up, basically.
Yeah.
And the collection looks so different in the fall than when it did when I graduated. It had evolved, and I had also actually learned how to program on the knitting machines, and also hand knitting as well. I mean, I knew how to hand knit, but I learned how to hand knit better. And then the machines. So then as my skills were increasing, it was like, well, I want to start adding this into the thing. And the hat rings had actually been like such a different concept at the beginning. So we made 2 mock-ups in the fall. We went to New York in November to Fabric Buy, at which point I went to Fab Scrap. I don't think we've touched on Fab Scrap yet, but so I had studied in New York my junior year. So that was spring of 2018. In spring of 2018, I learned about this company that's in New York, and they are called Fab Scrap, and they pick up from any of the 5 boroughs for free, and they will bring it back to their factory that's in the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and they will sort it based on volunteers. Like they are a nonprofit, so they work only with volunteers. And a lot of companies now have it be like a team bonding thing. They'll bring their whole department, and then they just stand there for 5 hours sorting fabric, and then they just like laugh and joke, and they have a great time, and then they go get drinks afterwards. So it's like a really fun environment. And so they sort through all the fabric, and then they resell it to young designers like myself. I'm talking dirt cheap, like $1 a pound. Or they will have it incinerated or destroyed. That usually happens with their proprietary material or the spandex, because we can't recycle that. But mostly it gets sorted and then it gets resold. They actually just opened up another store in Chelsea because their retail side was doing so well, and they are actually growing a whole bunch. The woman who started it worked for the Department of Sanitation, and she just saw how much like waste was going on, and they changed the laws. If your textile waste is more than 10% of your waste, you have to recycle it now. That's the law in New York City. And now she just goes everywhere talking about this company that she started. There's only 4 people that work there, and they're trying to open up another location in LA because a lot of people want them to come out there. There's also a lot of companies based in LA. And so I learned about this place, and I went, and they were having their warehouse opening. They didn't even have this warehouse yet. So I went, raided, got all these fabrics. I mean, I think I spent $50 and came home with like,
oh my God,
more than 50 yards of fabric, like different fabrics. I think it's like thrifting, but for fabric.
Right. Oh my God, you could go crazy with all that.
Because like you never know what you're going to find. And I found some really amazing stuff. So when it came time for my collection, I was like, this is where the only place, if I'm going to buy fabric, I'm only going to buy it from here. Like a lot of this I was making, I was knitting a lot of it. Actually, both these tops that are pictured right now, this gray and this darker gray, were 2 fabrics that were donated to me from this company that I was working for while I was in New York just for the few months. They're a knitting place themselves, and these 2 came back with the wrong dye lot. So it was just going to sit in their factory for like ever. And I was talking about like wanting to use it, and they were like, how much do you need? And I was like, well, I mean, how much are you willing to give me? And they were like, you take all of it if you want. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to take all of it because there was like 10 plus yards. And I was like, I don't need that much. So they gave me that, and then the rest was going to come from Fab Scrap. And then, so that's where like the Deadstock Fabric comes from and everything. And actually when I came to New York Fashion Week this fall, just a couple weeks ago, I went there again to start like thinking about my new collection. And one of their people is Marc Jacobs, and they're like the #1 name on the list. And so I went there, and there was this whole bolt of fabric. The packaging label was not even off of it, and it went to Marc Jacobs in May 2019. So they were going to use it for their fall collection, and they never even opened it, and they just sent it to FabScrap. I got 4 yards of that fabric, some leather, some other stuff, and I spent like $36. I mean, it's a steal, and that fabric was meant for Marc Jacobs. So think how good it is.
Oh my gosh.
And that's what I mean. You can find some really good gems there.
Love that, thrifting for fabric. Like
exactly.
The excitement of like when you find something, diamond in the rough, et cetera, et cetera.
And then it helps. I mean, I think it's just like a different design perspective too, because like if you go to Mood or any place like that, you're pretty much going to be able to get like whatever you want.
Right.
But if you have to work a little harder with only the things that you have, you know, I think that opens the door to creativity that you didn't, like the hat rings. Like right. I didn't know where that was going to go, but it opened the door for a creative piece to come out of it, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Oh, okay. So I could talk about that forever. I feel like the other thing that is so cool, as if that portion of your life isn't already cool enough, is this job you just started at L Brands. And for those not familiar, L Brands is the conglomerate that owns Victoria's Secret, Pink, and Bath & Body Works.
Yep.
And you just started.
I did.
It would be like, I don't know if you even know the answer to this, but like, I'm always curious, like, why do you think, well, first we'll learn about like what your role is, and also like, why do you think Victoria's Secret, if that's what specifically you're working on, like even thought like, okay, I really want to hire someone who knows a lot about this stuff, and I want this to be an initiative for the company?
So I don't think that they thought about that. I don't think that they knew what they were getting into when they hired me, but
I'm there now. No.
So I work actually, so yeah, I work for the conglomerate. So I work for all 3 of the companies,
Awesome.
Mostly in textile because I work in the textile testing lab. So fabrics come to me for different types of testing, wicking, you know, bra band elongation is a common test that we do, different things like that, fabrics especially, and then also like all the prints, because there's a lot of graphic tees and stuff that come out of Victoria's Secret, or like Pink, you know, that's silk screened on everything. That comes to me to get tested to see if that, like, if the ink is going to break, or if it's going to crock, or, you know, if there's a problem with the dye lot, or did this finish, you know, cause a problem later on. So we test like all sorts of things like that. And then also we research and develop like new, better, more sustainable ways to make a bra. It wasn't always more sustainable, but because that is really coming to light, you know, consumers' minds are really changing about what they want. And Victoria's Secret, we have like meetings all the time. I really just started like after I came back from fashion week, like September 16th. So it hasn't been very long. But we have meetings all the time, and what we're constantly talking about right now is who Victoria is. You know, who she is for the Victoria's Secret line and who she is for the Pink line, because those are 2 different target customers. Mm-hmm. And they think that perhaps their Pink customer is a little bit more interested in the sustainability aspect. You know, what is the company doing to better themselves or to be better? And Victoria's Secret actually views themselves as a little bit later in the trend than they would like to be. They, you know, they said that like in the last 5 years, lots of things changed, and all of a sudden they weren't the top dog anymore, and they want to know why, and they want to know how they can get back up there. And so on my first day, my first thing to do was go through the textile lab, because there was all this extra fabric there that had been tested for different things, water resistance, all things, and figure out what to do with it. And I was like, oh, I know what to do with it. It has to go to New York. It has to go to FabScrap. Like it does. So on my second day, I presented to my boss's boss about sending the excess fabric to FabScrap. And now, just today, we went up on their website, and we are a proud donator to FabScrap. All of our excess fabric from both raw materials, the textile lab in Ohio and New York, go to FabScrap, and I did it. It's like my single biggest accomplishment in life.
This is so cool. I mean, in what, less than 2 weeks?
Tomorrow's going to be Wednesday. So it took about 2.5 weeks to get the corporate chain rolling. But yeah, so she, just hold on. I have to grab the puppers. Oh. She just wanted to go up here. Oh my gosh.
Foster pup.
Yep, a new foster pup. Oh, there she is now.
No, like it's so, it also, you start to realize, I mean, between these cities that are so involved in fashion, it's the connections and like the ideas and forming the two of those. The fact that you were there, you knew about Fab Scrap,
Right.
you were trained on zero waste, et cetera, in fashion school. I mean, I feel like that's just going to multiply, and the impacts will multiply as our workforce kind of develops and people start to become more connected. Like,
right.
So, yeah.
And the woman who hired me, actually, she was like, I don't understand why you want to be here in the lab. She was like, you're a designer. Like, you should be out, like, spouting, you should be telling people, you should be out on your platform talking about all this. And it's like, I am just like a small girl from the Midwest. Nobody knows that I even exist. Like, it's really hard to get noticed when a lot of other people are trying to do the same thing. So I was like, I'm trying to figure out how I can have a bigger voice.
Yeah.
How can I get out there? How can I really make change? And my collection started out as being called From the Top. But now that's my brand, because I really think that, like, if changes are going to be made, they need to be started at the top, and then it will trickle down through the whole system. So I say that, like, here I'm out making changes from the top, because now Victoria's Secret, who never recycled anything before, does, because I did that. And I mean, that's what I mean. I'm trying to just have like a greater, bigger impact, even if I'm not the face of it.
If that's your goal, I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it already.
I told my husband, I was like, I hope I don't peak in my first 2 weeks.
Yeah, then you're gonna be like, all right, like, come on.
Right.
No, that's awesome. Well, Haley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. I'm trying to think of like a call to action or whatever. I can post your Instagram, obviously, alongside with wherever I distribute this. And hopefully, if you guys have any questions or follow-up comments, feel free to reach out to me or Haley directly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll go from there. And if you ever see the Fab Scrap brand, or as you're starting to look at, I always love looking at material tags, and you start to see, who knows, a change, you can think of Haley, and she is behind that.
Also, I will be back in New York City in February to do Fashion Week with Adelinda again. So.
Yes. There we go. Hopefully I'll walk again. Who knows?
Right? And you might be wearing some slick Marc Jacobs fabric.
Oh my God. No, it's going to be great. So yeah, that could be another follow-up. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, I'm like, how do I stop recording?